Welcome to Sales Fiction, a podcast that helps small sales teams get big results. I'm your host, Christy Lawrence, the founder of Mighty Sales and a longtime sales professional who traded my corporate sales career to help small but mighty teams do more with less. Each week on this podcast, we separate sales fact from sales fiction so that you can hyper-focus your effort on the skills, strategies, and tools that will have the biggest impact on your bottom line. Let's dive right in. When you lead a sales team, giving feedback is a part of the job, but not all feedback is created equally, or more importantly, received equally by your team members. And if your team members don't hear and integrate the feedback you're giving, you might as well not give them any feedback at all. So how do you coach your team members so they grow without being a hard ass? Join us for this episode of Sales Fiction, where I welcome guest Megan Fries to share constructive ways to give your team feedback and how you can give feedback so that it is received and sticks. Megan, thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you. For those who are listening in, Megan is an organizational consultant. She's the principal and owner of Frenzy to Freedom. She brings 20 years of experience from the for-profit sector in operations, business strategy, and financial strategy to nonprofit. So over the last 5 years, Frenzy to Freedom has done consulting and facilitation services through the business of the organization, translating operational growth and profitability to organizational strength and greater mission fulfillment. Megan is a certified Tiger consultant. And over the years in helping create stronger organizations with systems and accountabilities, she has seen the undeniable principles of trust, interdependence, genuineness, empathy, risk, and success surface in terms of helping organizations increase productivity and collaborative working groups. And when their omission is there, it creates a lot of dysfunction for teams. So Megan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We're so excited to have you today. So Megan, I'd love to hear from you. I know you have spent a lot of time around a lot of really great leaders in different organizations. And what do you see as the role of feedback in creating culture and developing people?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christy. So I myself worked for a company for a long time and then eventually worked myself into a position where we were hiring more and more people to take over things that I was doing. And I stepped up to higher positions. And now I do a lot of work with leaders, with business owners and executive directors. And feedback is a huge part of our conversation on most days. I do a lot of work around team engagement and getting team members to be happy with the job, to love the things that they're doing, and to know and have really clear communication from their leaders about what they're supposed to be doing. What are their priorities? And are they doing a good job with the things that are happening? So for me, the conversation with leaders, it's very often about listening to the employees, making sure it's really clear through position descriptions or however accountabilities are set that they know exactly what you are looking for from them. And then how well are they doing on a regular basis? And I encourage frequent check-ins is what I call them, but frequent conversations about, what are the things that are happening? What's working for you right now? What's not working for you right now? And what kind of barriers can a leader help remove so that things can go better in the future? And it's not usually about something you did this horribly wrong or you're doing a really crappy job at this. It's more about an open conversation where they can help each other to get things done better the next time around.
I love thinking about it in terms of an open conversation. Like one thing I do see a lot of times with my clients is they'll say, I have this team member that's struggling, or they're not hitting their metrics, or they're not doing their activities that, are set up for success. And then they feel like they're in this position where instead of actually having a collaborative conversation, it becomes about somebody's in trouble. And so what are the things that you feel like if somebody is struggling, how do you still have a collaborative conversation around that, but give them the feedback that helps them succeed?
Yeah, really good question. And I love that you said they're not meeting their metrics or they're not doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. Because for me, the conversation around, how are things going You usually have a goal that you're discussing or some kind of measurement that you're speaking of. And with that, you're either doing really well because of X, Y, and Z, or you're not making your mark because of X, Y, and Z. So it's always about what are we doing well that's working? What did we expect to do that would work well that's not working? And how do we either double down, so work harder towards this goal that we have, or how do we reevaluate and decide that we're going to shift and go into a new direction? And I think by having those conversations, it's a little bit less around, I didn't do well because I was supposed to make 100 calls and I made 10. That's usually a pretty easy conversation, because if that's you saying I was supposed to make 100 calls, but I did 10, it's pretty easy to know, well, did you, what got in your way? Is this 100 calls, not even possible? Or, were you going through something at home? It's about that conversation so that you figure out, can you make 100 calls, or is that unrealistic? So I think having it be more of that conversation turns it away from a, manager telling you did this wrong to a realization that, hey, I just can't do this right now because of this problem. Can you help me remove this problem, or is this a me problem that I need to work on personally? And then it, easier for a manager to support and help those that they're trying to bring up.
I love so much stuff you're doing there. I wrote down that question, what got in your way? I mean, to me, that is like a star, write that down, key feedback question, because a lot of times, and I'm always coaching my clients on this too, that there is this tendency to be, here's your metric. You were supposed to make 100 calls and you made 60. You need to make the calls, get the calls done. This needs to happen. And then it becomes a punishment conversation rather than a feedback conversation. And that question, okay, most people are aware if they've made 10 calls and they're supposed to make 100, that there's a gap there. And they're probably already feeling uneasy about it, maybe a little bit of embarrassment about it, maybe worried that they're going to get in trouble. So going into that conversation, a lot of times people have their guard up. And I'm always saying one of the things about delivering feedback is trying to get people to lower their guard down so they can actually hear what you're saying, to be able to have that collaborative conversation. And that question of what got in your way is such a great way to frame that, because it's asking for them for feedback before you're giving them feedback on what you think they should be doing.
Totally. And I think this is something that's coming up more and more. There's a lot of evidence out there that the traditional way of doing business, which is the top-down approach of, somebody at the top saying, this is what you must do, step 1, 2, and 3, to making it more a bottom up, where each person has the ability to create their own accountabilities or create their own change, to create their own movement. So it kind of puts the leader or the manager in a position of, removing barriers and helping the person to figure out exactly what they need to be more successful. It's not just up to the manager who's making the decision of, this is what you need to do and it's not working, so try this next. So it gives, there's so much more opportunity for people to, be creative and come up with different solutions for how they can contribute to this overall goal that the company or the organization has together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say, right, leadership is moving from forced cooperation to full cooperation. That's the goal, that you shouldn't be having to force people to cooperate or to comply, but you should be leading in a way where they give you their full cooperation because they want to. And that's a big shift. Thank you.
I'm going to use that. I'm stealing that right now.
Well, totally. I'm stealing what got in your way as a key coaching question for my sales leaders. So, and that, what I see a lot of times is in sales in particular, if you ask somebody what went well in that conversation or what went well with that account, and what do you think you would do differently? 9 out of 10 times, the person that you're coaching has the exact same observations that you as the coach and a leader have, but they're much more empowered when they self-identify it than when they're being told they did something wrong. Totally. And so one of the things that I'm always saying in feedback, what you're saying, is asking those questions, like checking in with them first to get their feedback on how it's going before you jump in and offer a solution.
Yes, totally. there's some opportunity in there for, for lessons. When it comes from yourself, it's so much more meaningful than when somebody is telling you and you're defensive, because I think that it is a very hard thing to not take feedback as I did this wrong and they're telling me how to do it right. When it turns into a conversation and you're, figuring out what worked for you or what didn't work for you, then you can, have more of that open back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And that being said, there are going to be those 1 out of 10 times where the person you're coaching is way off the mark and they don't have self-awareness and they're in a blind spot and they can't see it. So what are your thoughts on offering feedback in that situation where that person just isn't aware and they don't have the insight? How do you help them gain those insights in a way that's still collaborative?
I think it really comes down to how you approach it. And so having that conversation first and just hearing that they're maybe not catching on to some things that you've caught on to, it becomes a little bit more of a teachable moment where you're sharing information and stories that might help them to see how they could, do something better. But when it comes down to, you must give them, the feedback or some ideas, how you say it, so how you phrase it. You want to be genuine. You want to be, very sincere that this is, the group effort. We're all doing this for the same reason. We're, trying to meet this goal. And I'm here to help you and to remove barriers and to provide you the support that you need. And I always like to start with, a question like, can I give you some feedback? Or can I give you an idea? Or have you considered this? I think the worst situations are when someone says, this is what you should do. This is what needs to happen, because you automatically just, pull back into your shell and are like, oh crap, I didn't, they're telling me what to do and I don't know that I want to do it.
That's so important because a lot of times, right, when we talk about sales, we're always talking about getting the customer to buy in on every step of the process. But when it comes to leading salespeople, sometimes leaders forget that they're still in the sales process. They're just selling their team members on a certain way of doing things and their own growth and development. And it's still important to get their buy-in before moving them to the next step. So that simple question of, do you mind if I offer you some feedback on that conversation? Or do you mind if I offer some ideas on how to move this account forward?
Totally. And then I think then becomes a question of, well, what do you think of this idea? Or what do you think that you should do next? And you've given them the information. You've allowed them to, mull it over and think about maybe what they're best or they're skilled to do the best. So they help to choose the plan for themselves. And most of the time they will actually even say, well, I think that's a great idea. I'm going to try this, or I'm not sure about that, but it sounds like, this is a good direction for me to go in. So that by the end of the conversation, you have a very clear path and plan that the person has been involved with themselves. Because you're right, you're trying to help them to figure out what the next step is to take. And if it is forced, then there's going to be a lot more resistance. They're probably not going to do things the way that you would do them. And not everyone operates in the same way. So what works for you might not work, the same way for me. So everybody has a different approach. And I think being aware of that as a leader is also a really important step, so that you have this conversation, but you're still not telling them this is exactly what you need to do. It has to be something that they've made their own and they're going to champion and support and make happen.
Absolutely. Like they have to be bought in. Otherwise, it doesn't matter that you've given them the feedback. It reminded me of this story, right? So the question that comes up for me to ask to people is, how do you see yourself implementing this, right? After they've bought in, so they can kind of think about, what does this look like in real time? But I'm going to ask you a question about feedback too, and like your own feedback story. But you're telling that story reminds me, I had this sales manager and he was like the stereotypical used car salesman. He was tall, broad shoulders, kind of balding hair, a little bit overweight, white male. Like just when you picture a used car salesman, he's what you picture. And he was a great guy, but he had a very different selling style than I did. And I remember he was trying to get me to do stuff his way, even though I was having a lot of success. And he'd be like, you got to go in there. You do something like, just lick your finger and ask them like, which way is the wind blowing? And I'm like, there is no way in the world that I could ever say that with a straight face. Like it just wouldn't work, because that's the other thing. If you're asking people to do stuff that's not authentic and aligned for them, they're not going to be successful with it. So It's saying, here's how I might do it. How would you do that, achieve that same goal in a way that feels authentic to you? Because otherwise they're just going to do it when you're there and then turn around to doing something else without incorporating that bigger picture feedback. But I always remember that as an example of, I'm not going to do anything he's telling me to do. Like, I'll do it when he's here, but then I'm going to go back to the way I was doing things, which it doesn't help me in my development and growth, and then didn't help him from a leadership standpoint as well.
Yes, totally.
Have you ever received feedback in a way that you felt like was hard for you to receive?
That comment that I mentioned, this is what you're doing wrong, or you should try this. That's the first thing that's just like automatically, it just like makes me, kind of shut down and freeze a little bit. That, and I think that, I've had some experiences early on in jobs that I've had where it was just very evident that the person who was teaching me and training me was so different from me. And they also didn't really have any empathy in the fact that I might learn things differently, or that I was learning how to do completely new jobs. And it didn't really set me up to be successful. I was not engaged. I was not doing my best for the organization. And I really just didn't do a great job. And it took a really long time for me to get up to speed, because there was so much resistance. And why can't you get this right? Why aren't you doing this? This is just how it's done, with absolutely no training and no background on why things happen the way that they happened. So in very many cases, it's that culture. What is the culture around, this feedback and training and learning something that's completely new to another person? You can go one way where, it's just be tough and do it. Or you can create more engagement, commitment from the people that are on your team, so that they want to do their best and that they're able to and set up for success. I think that's probably the best example of bad situations I've had.
And I think what you're saying goes back to what you said at the very beginning, that part of delivering feedback comes before you need to deliver it, with having clearly written out and agreed upon expectations, goals, strategies, job descriptions. So when you're having those conversations, it's about, okay, the goal is XYZ. We're not achieving that goal, but then we're already both bought in that is the goal. That is the expectation versus I thought there was a totally different expectation. And then like, what do you feel like is getting in the way? How do you feel like we might be able to make adjustments and still reach this goal? What are some different strategies we might employ? And that's the other thing. I think feedback isn't two ways. And oftentimes the people we're giving feedback to, maybe they have an idea of how they want to do something that's outside of how it's been done organizationally in the past. And if we don't give them an opportunity to share that with us, it could be a way better idea than something we've thought about. And so why not give people the opportunity to surprise us with new ideas versus trying to put our ideas on them?
Yes. And I think that that's the power in having a bottom-up approach to getting things done. There are certain situations like military where top-down, they just need to tell somebody what to do for the safety of everyone. But in most organizations, it's better to have a lot more, empowerment in the people on the ground so that they can come up with solutions and create more resilience, create stronger organizations, be more creative to, solve problems and figure out different ways to do things. I totally agree with everything that you're saying with the setting expectations. That to me, if you're having, regular check-ins and giving feedback to someone and they don't understand what you're expecting of them, that for me is the biggest red flag. And I would never, after that first company where I had to create my own job description, I would never work for a company or a person where I didn't understand very clearly what it was they needed from me and asked from me. And I run into situations where a lot of employees are very hesitant to create job descriptions if they haven't had one, especially if they're in, organizations which are quickly growing and they wear many hats. But I would want to have that in place, because then this check-in and this conversation is more around, well, I have 45 accountabilities. I have, only so many hours in the day. How do you think I should best prioritize these? And that's usually the the uncomfortable conversation when you're talking about either annual reviews or just feedback and regular check-ins. I feel like I'm doing my best at this, but you're expecting too much from me. And that, just like you're saying, it needs to be more of a back and forth conversation. It's not always just about, hey, you didn't do this right and you're not meeting our requirements. It's about, I need help with this. And as a leader, leaders today, it's about listening and it's about removing barriers and helping to provide information and opportunities for everybody to do better. Because it's not a race. It's not that competition where I need to do the best because he's the worst and I'm not the worst. It's about, we want this organization to grow. We have these goals and we want to achieve them together.
Yeah. And as you're talking, what's standing out for me too, is it's important for leaders when they're giving feedback to open the door to receiving feedback as well. So that saying, now that we've had this conversation and, you've identified some things that you're going to do differently, maybe some changes you're going to make. The question to me that comes up is, what do you need from me to be successful in this as a leader?
Yes.
What barriers can I remove for you?
Exactly. That is the ideal conversation so that everybody knows that there's support and that you're in this as a team. You're in this together. And I think the best leaders, they expect that part of the conversation to happen and to be able to support and be there for their team members.
Yeah. Can you think of a time when you've received feedback in a way that was really helpful and it impacted positively the way you were doing something?
Yeah, so it's kind of the same example I gave before, but we worked with a business coach for quite a few years and we met them so this was a career I had many, many years ago. Right before the recession, we met some business coaches that moved into the hall down the hall from us. And we started working with them and we got some of our systems in place and it literally saved our business because, I think just like many people who start businesses, you do it because you love the thing that you're doing, the service or the product that you're selling, or you're really good at something, or you just completely lucked out at something. That's why you're in business and doing what you do. You don't usually start it because you want to manage a budget and you know what a P&L looks like and you know all of those things that you have to know as a business owner. So it totally helped us. And I think that the conversations that I know that work well about feedback come from that time where I certainly have made many mistakes. And I remember at certain times, our mentor and coach, she would always ask, can I give you some feedback? And it's not that she wasn't going to give me the feedback. If I said no, it made me more of an owner in that situation because I'm saying, yes, I want your feedback. And it's setting me up just mentally to be able to receive the information that she's giving me rather than that, let me tell you this, or you're doing it all wrong, or here's what you need to do. So that to me is, I think setting up the scene for being able to, take in what somebody is going to tell me that I'm probably not doing right or a better way that I can do something. That is the best way to do it in my experience.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about that too, even just the language of, can I give you some feedback? Can I share some insight? Those language are very much about like receiving and giving. There's just something powerful in language that shifts the mindset versus sharing versus telling.
Yes, totally.
And so it tees it up nicely that way. It's funny. I am learning to skate ski right now. I took my first lesson and it is exciting and very hard, but it's been fun for me. We have a phenomenal coach and teacher, and she is so good about delivering feedback. And one thing that I noticed that she does that I try to do too, and I'm curious on your thoughts, is she tries to pinpoint one thing that we're doing well and then one area to work on. And there is, to me, something really powerful about getting that positive feedback framed sometimes before something to work on, where it makes me realize that even if I have opportunities for growth and I can do things better, that I'm still valued, that I'm still doing a good job, and that it frames that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's really important. And anytime we're doing any kind of group training with folks, and, a lot of the work I do is about how can we be more efficient, more effective with the time that we have? How can we gain more engagement from our team members? It's never about you're doing all the wrong things and here's all the right things. It's about we're doing really good and we're at this level. We understand what our baseline is. We understand the things that we're doing right now that are really working for us. And we want to build upon that. We want to get better and better. And, the organizations that I meet and work with, they aren't ones that are usually failing. Sometimes they have a cash flow challenge, but usually they're very advanced in what they're doing, and they're killing it in some regards. But they want to get better, because that's just, I think, the nature of being an organization and just being a person. Life is boring if you're always, at the same level and you're not trying for something else. So I think it's kind of just within human nature, as it is within organizational culture, to want to do things better the next day. So I really like to frame the conversation around, here are all the good things that are happening and what we've got going for us, and how do we build upon those? And here's some examples and ideas of what other organizations are doing, so that it really is about getting better and better. It's not about fixing what's wrong all the time.
Absolutely. And sometimes I say too, I think there's that balance, but I often tell people, when we're doing a sales audit of their organization and kind of looking at where they're strong and where they're not, that there's this tendency to feel like, oh my gosh, we're doing so bad. And I think a lot of time feedback it's like your gas gauge, right? It's not about good or bad. It's just, if my gas gauge is at a quarter of a tank, it's just information that I need to go to the gas station. I don't hold my head in shame and I'm such a bad person, I'm never going to have gas. And there's no solution here. It's that, okay, I've got a quarter tank of gas. I've got this long to get to the gas station. I'm going to go to the gas station and get gas. Yes. And oftentimes, if we think about feedback from that standpoint, it's a way to depersonalize it and to continue to grow. And that what I like about that analogy too is, even if you fill up the tank, you're eventually going to have to put more gas in. And growth is a long-term commitment. You never get to the destination. There is no end game. So feedback is something that needs to be collaborative, consistent, and ongoing, because none of us ever get to perfection. We might get to mastery, but we always can still grow and refine. And I think organizations can lose sight of that sometimes. And setting the frame, like you're talking about all the things the organizations and the people in the organization are doing well, and we want to continue to grow and build. It's like going to the gym. You've got to keep showing up. You don't get strong and then stop going to the gym.
Right.
You got to keep showing up, which is really unfortunate because.
Yes, I like to call it opportunity. So what is the opportunity that we have? And that's, especially if it's an organization who might have a lot of opportunity, it's much nicer to hear we have a lot of opportunity for growth. We have a lot of opportunity to do things better. So it's not really about the challenges and solving the problems. It's about how do we, what kind of opportunity do we have ahead of us to get to that next step, which is to be better than we were yesterday.
I love that. I'm going to start using that more in my sales conversations with companies that I'm working with. Because sometimes I feel like I can get into that, here's all the things we're going to do. Here's all the things that are great. But thinking about here's the opportunities that you have in front of you. And this is the work that you've already done to create those opportunities. So now how do we maximize those opportunities and continue to get better every single day? So that's super, super helpful. Is there anything else that we've talked about? Is there mistakes that you see people make giving feedback that you think people need to just be aware of? I think you've already talked about one, just the telling without checking in. What other mistakes do you see people making when it comes to delivering feedback?
I've talked about a lot of them, but I'll just kind of recap. I think assuming that everyone operates in the same way, what you just said about sometimes it's really hard when we're excited and we like the detail and we know the things that, we would do or we would want to happen, to just dive in and say, yeah, let's do all these things. But as that leader stepping back and saying, okay, I realize that not everyone is exactly like me. And let's bring this, make you feel completely safe and secure, and understanding that this is a conversation that we're having and that you're able to use this information to choose your own plan. So I think not setting the scene, that's a huge one, where you just dive in and give all the information and ideas that you've ever had, rather than asking, can I give you feedback? And what do you think? And how do you think you should move forward? What do you think, should happen in this situation? And what are you going to do next? I think those are often mistakes. And then, just to close and wrap up the conversation with feedback, what is the plan and what can I support you and help you with for the next time? So if we meet every week, what are you going to do between now and next Wednesday to move forward? And how can I support you in making sure that that happens? And that way, you also, everybody's very clear about what's the next thing that's going to happen and what are you going to expect that I have accomplished by next week. So it gives that more ownership as well. And it's not just on the leader who doesn't want to get somebody in trouble for, them not doing the thing that they were supposed to do. It's more often that the person feels that it's their job, they're accountable for it, and they're going to let themselves down and they're going to let this person down if they don't stand up to their word.
No, that's super helpful. The other mistake I see people make a lot, and I wonder if you see this too, is giving too much feedback at one time. That maybe you see like 3 or 4 or 5 opportunities for development and growth, and you want the person in front of you to do all of those things. But I'm going to use my skate skiing example. I'm like, I can only think about weight transfer. The minute I start thinking about something in addition to weight transfer, because I haven't mastered weight transfer yet, the whole thing falls apart, right? And I think that is the biggest mistake that a lot of leaders make, is they want people to go from maybe where they are now to mastery overnight versus what is the foundational step? Let me give feedback and coaching on that. And then once they've mastered that, then I'll give the next piece of feedback. That they give too much feedback at one time and it becomes overwhelming and people don't receive any of it. Do you see that happen a lot?
Totally. I definitely do. And that's exactly why I am a big fan of the weekly and the regular check-ins. So you have job descriptions and you know the accountabilities that you have, and you probably should check in on those or have a review once a year just to make sure that the actions that person is taking are still the right ones. But the goals that you set and the milestones that you have throughout the year, you're constantly moving forward on. And it's a very common thing, I think, with goal setting and with, tasks, and especially people like us who really want to get all the things done, is to have too many things to focus on. And if you're checking in regularly and you're having that conversation and you're saying, what are you going to do between now and next week? If you say 25 things, then it's like, I don't know how do I help you with 25 different things that you're doing? That seems like a lot. And pull it back into, if you're only going to get the most important thing done, how are you going to prioritize the steps that you have? And that's what helps a person grow. That's what a leader can do. Listen to the things that they're saying, give them information, and allow them to kind of make that choice and have that buy-in to the thing that's going to make the biggest difference between now and next week, or now and the next month, on the thing that's the most important in their world.
And I think, to your point, it's better to do more frequent, smaller check-ins than less frequent, longer check-ins, where then somebody becomes overwhelmed and they don't create that consistency in it.
Yeah, because it's top of mind. I mean, it really is. The goal is not something that you're stepping away from. It might be a really big goal that's set for a quarter, but you should have little mini goals or little things, little strategies that happen every week to move closer and closer to that. And if things aren't happening on a regular, basis to move towards that, then you have a problem. Then that there's something else that's, in the way. There's another barrier, or there's just not enough time. And then it's that open conversation about, why is there not enough time? What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What should we double down on? And what should we step away from?
I think that's fantastic. Is there anything, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, maybe we're good at giving feedback, maybe we're not in an organization, but are there kind of things that you see as maybe identifiers that an organization needs to be more conscious about how they're delivering feedback to their team?
I think if they're not hearing any feedback themselves, if you're constantly having conversations and the employee or the team member is not saying this isn't working or how can I make this happen, or I need more support from you, or I just don't have this resource available to me, I would see that as a huge red flag that they maybe don't feel secure. They are afraid of not doing something right, or of not letting you know that something's not working for them. Employees have to feel comfortable and secure in what's happening in the organization to be able to say things that aren't working well. And if that's not happening, then I feel like there's probably something missing with the feedback. It shouldn't all be roses. It shouldn't all be, everything is achieved every single week. Or maybe, you're not trying hard enough. Maybe the goal isn't set high enough. Maybe we don't allow people the creativity and the ability to risk a little bit to gain a bigger reward. So making sure that people feel like they can do their best without a repercussion is key to creating major growth. You can stay stagnant, you can kind of keep it safe, but is that really what we all want to be doing every day? Probably not.
Absolutely. That's such great insight in terms of if you're not receiving feedback, then there's something organizationally going on that needs to be addressed. Is there anything that we haven't talked about around feedback that you think is really important for people to know?
Well, I think we've touched on a lot of the back and forth, and that as even as a leader, you want to get feedback. And I think with every leader, like you have to have your group of people, not just the people who you're managing, but your group of people who are coaching you, who are, allowing you to be stronger and a better person. And it might be a board of directors, it might be the owner or an executive director, it might be an external coach or somebody who's there to keep you honest. And I think that's a really important factor for every leader that's out there. You should have a group to go to. You should have a person to go to bounce ideas off of, and also keep you honest. So I think if that's maybe the only thing that we didn't get super detailed on, but it's a great way for people to continuously grow and get better at giving feedback even.
If you're in a leadership role, you need to be getting feedback and continuing to grow if you expect that from your team members, that it's not just an expectation for the team, but you're holding yourself to that same standard and you have people in place that can support you in that.
It's a part of the values of your company, the culture of your company. If you're expecting that your team sets goals and you're giving them feedback and they're growing, you have to do that yourself. You have to be ready to go out there and seek that kind of support on, even if you're at the very top of the organization, there is somebody out there that you can go to.
Absolutely. And, just making sure, and that's what I love for a lot of the companies that I work with, the leaders, where they actually want to bring people in and get feedback on themselves. And it's a great way to show the organization that growth isn't just something we expect for you. It's something we expect from us too. And that everyone in the company is continuing to grow, even at the highest level, that you don't just stop because you move up in where you want to be. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Megan. This was so helpful and insightful. And I know so many people struggle with this, how to give feedback. They don't want to be the Simon Cowell of judging, but then they don't want to be the Paula Abdul either. And I think the tools that you talked about and the strategies that you talked about are really, really helpful for creating a healthy organization that does grow. If you want more information about Megan and you want to connect with Megan and learn more about the work that she's doing to help organizations succeed both operationally and also within their team cultures, visit frenzytofreedom.com. Again, that's frenzytofreedom.com. Megan, thank you again so much for joining us. This was absolutely fantastic. If you guys liked this episode, make sure that you join us next week. One of the things Megan talked about was that need to set goals and accountability. And next week, I'm going to be sharing some strategies to set goals and how to communicate those goals to your sales team and get their buy-in so that they believe in their ability to reach the goal and they're challenged and committed to reaching that goal outside of just their commission structure. In the meantime, if you liked this episode, make sure to give it a 5-star review and subscribe to Sales Fiction so you can get fresh episodes downloaded as soon as they're available.
Thank you so much for having me. I've learned so much myself, and it was a great conversation.